Well, hello there. So we're ready to get started on our pre-licensing dwelling information. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen with you, and we are going to go over here to our personal lines dwelling. So this is a personal lines dwelling class. It's supplemental material for property and casualty. It is not state specific, even though I'll talk about that as well. I'm Tammy Grisso DeLaura, and I have a school called Tammy DeLaura Insurance Educators, mainly focusing in North Carolina now, but going into other states. Now, keep in mind, this is not going to satisfy your pre-licensing requirement in your state. It is used only as supplemental material. All right, you're in the right place if you've been struggling with the property and casualty pre-licensing state exam, and you really, really want this career change. You have taken a self-study or classroom class, and there is so much material, it's very hard to figure out what is important. And trust me, I get that. I've been teaching this for over 25 years, and there is so much material out there. I get this so much from people. And you want a streamlined approach. You want to know what's important and the key subjects and key points for each one of these types of topics that we're going to be talking about. So that is what we're going to be doing here. A little bit about myself. I've been in the insurance industry for over 30 years, and I've been teaching insurance classes for 27 years. I'm actually a subject matter expert for Pearson VUE. And I've purchased several insurance agencies in addition to owning this insurance school. So I'm telling you that so you can understand that I am in the trenches with you guys. So I look forward to our days together. Be sure to follow us on Facebook and LinkedIn under Tammy DeLaura Insurance Educators. My motto is prepare, repeat, 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 repetition, and that will give you confidence. So inhale confidence and exhale doubt, and let's get started here. If you want something you never had, you have to do something you've never done, right? It is a difficult test, but you can pass this if you know the key points of what you need to study for each one of these things. And that's what we're going to do, is help you out with that. So what I'm going to do, I have to give you this disclaimer here because policy forms do change. Underwriting rules vary from company to company. My whole deal is to give you information so that you will have for the state exam. So again, this is just a disclaimer that I have to put on here. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the video off because I don't want to distract you, and I really want to dig deep into this form called the dwelling form. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the video off, and then I will be right back with you guys. Now, when it comes to the dwelling property form, you have a basic form, you have a broad form, and you have a special form. Your basic form is a DP1. Your broad form is a DP2, and your special form is a DP3, very similar to what we just talked about in the homeowner world. Now, your eligibility requirements are a little bit different here. It does cover the named insured and the insured spouse, as long as the spouse lives in the same household. That sounds very familiar to what we did in the homeowner policy. Here you can have up to 5 boarders and up to 4 apartments. It may not be occupied by the owner. Now, remember, in our homeowner world, they had to be occupied by the owner. Okay, so if Tom Smith came in and he had just purchased a home, and we said, well, Tom, are you going to be living in the home? And he said, yes, so we could put him on a homeowner form. But if he says no, then we couldn't. Well, this is where you would put him, is this dwelling property form. It can be under construction, but again, you have to watch that. Think about basements being redone or bathrooms being renovated, not a piece of land, and you start building on it. That's called a builder's risk. Now, it's used to insure homes that do not qualify for the homeowner policy for various reasons. So maybe Tom is going to be living in that house, but for various reasons, like tenant occupied, maybe the age of the home is too old. Now, when we say that, we don't have to memorize the guidelines because every company is a little bit different. So maybe our company says any homes that are 50 years or older need to go on a dwelling policy, or maybe the value is too low. Maybe the value is $80,000 and our homeowner form doesn't start until $100,000. I'm just using these as examples. Or maybe our homeowner has too many losses. Again, we'll put them in the dwelling form. So with a dwelling form, you can have an owner occupied or you can have a non-owner occupied. And with a homeowner form, remember, you only could have owner occupied. Now, we like mobile homes on mobile home policies. Most companies do. And remember, in our homeowner form, we could do a mobile home as long as the company approved it and we endorsed it on the homeowner policy, basically saying this is a mobile home. But here, some companies will let you put it under the basic form. It has to be permanently located or tied down. That's where you've seen a mobile home and they have a foundation around it. That's what they're talking about there. Now, when we talked about our homeowner policy, we said that it was a package policy. It was property and liability. Here, our dwelling policy is not a package policy. It is only property. There is no Section 2 liability that is automatic like it is in the homeowner form. In the homeowner form, we had Section 1 property and we had Section 2 liability. Here, if we want Section 2 liability, we'll have to endorse it. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. Now, as far as the coverage items and other coverages, they look very similar to your homeowner form. You have a coverage A dwelling, and it is the same definition. It covers the dwelling, structures attached to the dwelling, materials and supplies for use in construction or the repair of the dwelling or other structures. There's outdoor equipment that's covered in this limit. Remember, tractors and lawnmowers are covered under here. Coverage B is other structures, which is 10% of coverage A. Buildings that are separated from the dwelling by a clear space. And again, just like your other structures in your homeowners, the building cannot be used for commercial, manufacturing, or farming. Personal property contents is 50% of coverage A. So far, everything looks like our homeowner as far as our limits are concerned. Now, remember, your guest may be covered at the insurer's request, but your boarders will not be. Coverage D, fair rental value. So in your homeowner world, we had some additional living expenses, and that was the only loss of use that we had. Here, there's two, because if that person, if Tom Smith is renting out his home, now listen carefully. So if you're multitasking, come back to me because this is real important. If Tom is renting out his home, then, and that home has a fire, Tom's not going to care about going to a hotel like he did if he were in that home. So if he's renting out that home and there's a fire, then we'll want to give him fair rental value, which means we will want to give him that rental income that's coming into his home. So if those tenants are paying $1,000 a month, that's what we're going to want to give Tom, not go stay in a hotel and the company will pay for your additional living expenses. Now, keep in mind, and this is kind of tricky on the state test, it has nothing to do with the tenant. The tenant should have their own HO4 policy that will pay for their loss of use, for their additional living expenses. It's all about our insured, in this case, Tom Smith. So if Tom, again, is renting out his home and there is a fire, then he's going to want fair rental value. And that's going to be 20% of coverage A for DP2 and DP3, which is your broad and special, and 10% for DP1. Now, remember, it was 10% for HO8 basic as well. Okay, so this coverage is available if that building becomes uninhabitable and that insured cannot collect rent. Now, this is payable at 1/12 of the 10% or 20% limit. So if it comes out to $12,000 to make it easy for fair rental value, that's going to be $1,000 each month that they would pay out while they are repairing that building. It's not going to be, $12,000 and it's for 4 months. It's for each month. They would divide it up. Now, coverage E, additional living expenses, that's for that Tom that lives in the home, and maybe he couldn't get a regular homeowner policy because his age of his home was too old, or the value of his home was too low, or he had too many losses. Then he, of course, would get additional living expenses. So this is that situation where the insured lives in the home. Now, additional living expenses are only available with DP2 and DP3. Okay, with most of your states there. Now, just like we had in our homeowner world, we have some additional coverages as well in our dwelling world. We have debris removal. This coverage is included in the limit that applies to the damaged property. We have property removal. So if we need to remove some property to a warehouse, remember, it is for any peril. So usually flood and earthquake are excluded. So if there is a flood, it would cover that with property removed. Now, in our homeowner world, property removed was 30 days. Here, it is 30 days for DP2 and DP3, but not for DP1. That is 5 days. Reasonable repairs, we had that as well in our homeowner policy. Improvements, alterations, and additions. So it provides coverage for insureds who are tenants for improvements and alterations. Up to 10% of the coverage C is available. Fire department charge, just like we had $500 there. Worldwide coverage in our homeowner policy was all of our limit. Here it's only 10%. Trees, shrubs, and other plants. Again, very, very limited perils here, like fire, lightning, explosion, not your windstorms. Okay, just like in your homeowner world. Now, in your homeowner world, trees, shrubs, and plants apply to all your homeowner forms. Here is just for DP2 and DP3. Collapse is only for DP2 and DP3. Okay, what is an example of collapse? Collapse is heavy equipment. Collapse is heavy rain that collects on the roof, hidden decay, weight of contents. Okay, weight of contents, equipment, animal, or people. It is not an additional coverage. Okay, so again, it is only on DP2 and DP3. Glass or safety glazing material. Usually your glass peril, whether it's a homeowner or here, is think about your homes that are on a golf course, or your homes that mainly, like I said, on a golf course where they have that special glass so that if a golf ball pings their glass, it doesn't break, very quickly. So that again is collapse. But for your trees, for your collapse, for your glass, all of this is only available on DP2 and 3. You do have some ordinance or law coverage here. You have ordinance and law coverage on your homeowners as well. Here is 10% of coverage A. And what this is insurance isn't designed to pay extra coverage for building codes. So if there's a fire and your home needs to be adjusted for building codes, they need to do something differently, because remember, insurance is all about replacing. Then they will give you 10% of coverage A for that. They do that on the homeowners as well, but this is only available with DP2 and DP3. So keep in mind, trees, collapse, glass, and ordinance is only available for DP2 and DP3. Now, just like we had in our homeowner world, we have some property excluded here, like money, banknotes, coins, electronic data processing, credit cards, animals, birds, and fish. We had that excluded. Now, remember, in our homeowner world, we had $200 for money. Here we have none. In our homeowner world, we had animals, birds, and fish excluded as well. Aircraft was excluded as well under homeowner. Motor vehicles, except those to maintain the premises. Think lawnmowers, tractors. Even golf carts on this policy and the homeowner policy will be covered as long as they maintain the premises. Now, if you take that golf cart off the premises for either a homeowner or a dwelling, it won't be covered. So I always like to put my golf carts on a recreational policy because, again, golf carts will be covered as long as they maintain the premises. Boats are not covered at all here. Now, remember the homeowner policy, they were $1,500 under Section 1. All right, here they're not covered at all. Hovercraft and drones were also not covered under the homeowner policy either. So in our homeowner policy, we did have some coverage for money, $200. In our homeowner policy, we did have some $1,500 for electronic data. In our homeowner policy, we did have $1,500 for boats. But then we also had most of the stuff excluded as well in our homeowners. Now, there are some types of forms here. You have your DP1, you have your DP2, and you have your DP3. So you have your basic form, you have your broad form, and you have your special form. Now, basic is fire, lightning, and internal explosion. Now, remember, in your homeowner policy, you had basic fire, lightning, wharves, and we had that acronym, vandalism, malicious mischief, and theft. Here we only have 3 perils. So they basically took the explosion and only made it internal explosion. Hostile fire is covered, not friendly, and that's the case in all your forms. Hostile fire is not in a fireplace type thing. Now, what you can do is you can put extended coverages on here. And this is basically that acronym WARV, where you can add on for a premium extended coverages, which are the WARVs: windstorm, hail, aircraft auto, riot, volcanic explosion, and smoke. These perils must be endorsed. Vandalism, malicious mischief can be purchased by paying additional premium as well. Now, you can't buy vandalism, malicious mischief unless you buy extended coverages. Also, theft has to be endorsed. So in your DP1, you only have 3 perils. You have fire, lightning, internal explosion. You have to endorse your WARVs. You have to endorse vandalism, malicious mischief, and you have to endorse theft, okay, to match it, kind of thinking about your HO8. Now, your DP2 looks just like your HO2 broad form, except it doesn't have any theft on there. So it has the big effect, okay? But again, you have to always endorse that theft. So it automatically covers all the basic perils plus extended coverages plus vandalism, malicious mischief. Again, there's going to be some, if your building, just like in homeowner, is vacant over 60 days, burglary, glass, water perils, all of those things are just not going to be covered. Theft are not going to be covered. Ice, snow, sleet. So this is your big effect. And it basically is the same definitions that you had in your homeowner form. When it comes to ice, snow, sleet, remember awnings are going to be excluded. That's a tough exclusion. That's also on your homeowner form as well. Awnings just are not covered. Glass, accidental discharge of water or steam from within a plumbing, heating, air conditioner, automatic fire protected sprinkler system. Again, it's not covered if the building has been vacant over 60 days. Freezing, and it has to be sudden. The insured has to maintain heat. Again, all of these definitions are the same as in your homeowner. Falling objects, electrical current, collapse, and tearing apart. So you had these specific perils, just like you had in homeowners. DP2 looks a lot like HO2, except you don't have theft. You never have theft on any of your dwelling forms. It has to be endorsed. Now, your DP3 looks a lot like your HO3. It provides open perils coverage on the dwelling and other structures, ensuring your risk that are not specifically excluded, but your personal property goes back to broad form. And guess what you have to do if you want your theft? You have to always endorse theft coverage. That is something that you have to do on all of your DP forms. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go back to the share screen, and I just want to show you a couple things here to kind of put this in perspective for you. So let's talk about perils for a moment. And let's kind of review on our homeowner perils. For our HO8, which was called our basic policy, we had fire, we had lightning, and then we had this thing called WARVs. And what was WARVs? Well, it was your wind, and it was your hail, and your aircraft auto. Again, it's just an easy way for us to remember this. And it's riot, and volcano, and explosion, and you had smoke, and vandalism, malicious mischief, which that's the way you usually see it, and then you have some theft coverage. Your HO2 policy was broad, and it basically was all of these perils plus the big effect. And what did that stand for? Well, that stands for burglary, and that stands for your ice and your snow and your sleet and all of that, okay? But it doesn't include awnings. And then you had glass, and then you had accidental discharge. Think water escaping from your dishwasher, your washing machine, that type of thing. And you had falling objects. Maybe it wasn't a plane, maybe something just fell out of the sky, or a tree hit your house. So you had some falling objects there. You have freezing, again, not the drips, peel back. There's a lot of mold, that type of thing. It has to be sudden. Okay, you have some electrical, you have collapse, and you have tearing apart. All right. Now, in your HO3, again, your HO2 includes your basic form. So let's go ahead and put that down, plus these extra perils. Now, your HO3 was a special policy. And they split that out and they said, okay, for coverages A and B, we're going to have open perils, which means everything's covered that's not excluded. And then for coverage C, we're going to go back and do broad perils. And then what could you do? You could put an HO15 on here, and that would give you open perils. You had an HO5 policy as well that was called a comprehensive policy. And basically, it is coverages A, B, and C are all open perils. You had an HO6 policy, which is, well, let's go to HO4 first. You had an HO4 policy, which is your renter's policy, and that is coverage C, and that went to broad perils. And then you had HO6, which is your condo. And again, we're not worried about coverage A and B because that's contents, that is your dwelling and your other structures. So here with the contents, that is broad form as well. Okay, now looking at your dwelling. Well, your dwelling, you had a DP1. A DP1 is your basic policy. Now, it only has 3 perils: fire, lightning, and internal explosion. Now, what they did is, see this E up here, explosion? They are only insuring internal explosion. And then what do you have to do? You have to endorse extended coverages. Now, what are your extended coverages? These are your wards. So you have to endorse that. You have to endorse vandalism and malicious mischief. And you have to endorse any type of theft. Now, what I would do is when you get to your state test, you'll probably have a whiteboard. And I would write down all these perils. I would just dump those out on the whiteboard. And that way they're in front of you as you take this test. So remember, to match up your DP1 with your HO8, we're going to have to do some endorsing. Now, your DP2, which is called your basic policy, looks just like your DP2 looks a lot like your HO2. So, basically what you have here with your DP2 is you have this broad form, which includes all the basic perils like you have, which includes fire, lightning, wars. It even includes vandalism, malicious mischief, right? So it includes, all your basic perils. Okay. Plus it includes your big effect. Now, which is all of that up there. Now, what do you have to do if you want theft? You always, always, always have to endorse theft. And then your DP3 is a special policy. Okay, so we'll split it out. We'll say coverage A and B are your open perils, and your coverage C, we go back to our broad perils. And again, you have to always endorse that. So the only way to get through this is to sit down and really memorize this. This is why flashcards that I have on my website really, really help, because you have those flashcards and you can just sit there and just say them to yourself. Repetition over and over and over again. So important to do. Okay, so I'm going to go back to our PowerPoint here. And our perils that are excluded, you'll notice, are very similar to or are very close or the same as your homeowner policy: earth movement, water damage, including flooding. Remember, flood, we're going to write a separate policy. Water backup, any type of sump pump, all of that usually can be endorsed. Power interruption that occurs away from the insured location, tough exclusion. The insurer's failure to save and preserve their property or protect it. All of these are exclusions. War, nuclear, intentional, any type of government destruction. Same as we had in our homeowner world, as far as having some exclusions there. Now, the loss settlement. The good news is losses are settled pretty much like they were settled in your HO world as well. So I'm going to show you a quick way to memorize that as well. So let's go back up here and let's talk about how our losses are settled. And remember, this is called an unendorsed form. Okay, an unendorsed form. So how are losses settled? If you remember in your HO world, Your HO8 world, you had your coverages A, which is your dwelling, your B, which is your other structures, and your contents, which is coverage C. All of that was ACV, actual cash value. And then your HO2 and your HO3 were just alike. So you had coverages A, coverages B, and you had replacement costs as long as you had 80% coinsurance. And then we had coverages C was always ACV. Okay, just like it is over in HO8 as far as coverage C is concerned. Okay, so we had coverage C that was your ACV there. Now, kind of separate this out a little bit. Now, in our HO5 world, we had coverages A, B, and C. Everything was replacement cost. Now, remember, you can always endorse these two replacement costs, but this is the unendorsed form. Your HO4, we're only worried about contents. Now, remember, your HO4 and your HO6 are the same. We're only worried about contents there, and that is ACV. So if you notice, all of your contents are ACV except for your HO5, and it's all the way across replacement cost. Okay, now what happens here, we'll put a star beside this, so kind of going a different angle here, is what happens with your DP forms here is it looks very similar to your HO8, HO2, and HO3. So your DP1 form, your coverages A, B, and C, guess what, are all ACV, just like your HO8. Your DP2 and your DP3 look just like your HO2 and your HO3. Your coverages A and B. If I capitalize these or don't, it doesn't matter. I'm just, don't worry about that. So it's replacement cost. It's just hard for me to type and write sometimes, but I just want to get this to you. And that's as long as you have 80% coinsurance, and then your coverage C here is ACV. So if you notice, your DP1 looks just like your HO8 as far as losses are settled. Your DP2 and 3 look just like your HO2 and 3. So that's some great ways to memorize that. Okay, and then we have these different homeowner forms here. And then we have these 3 different dwelling forms. Okay, so some really good information there that you may want to take a picture of, and so that you can memorize for that. Because again, it is just total memorization when it comes to this property. Okay, going back to our PowerPoint. So you have your ACV there. So the loss settlement states that the cover properties losses are at ACV, but you could have some replacement costs, as you know. They need to repair this within 30 days. There is a deductible. Remember, there's always one deductible. Okay. And then we talked about the ACV as far as the DP1, everything being ACV, and DP2 and 3. Your buildings are going to be replacement costs, and then your personal property ACV. So again, just take some memorization there to remember those things. Now, when it comes to personal liability, Section 2 coverage and theft, this is not going to be on your on your dwelling policies like it was in your homeowner policy. Remember, your homeowner policy has Section 2 liability and theft on every single form. It doesn't matter if you have an HO8 or an HO2, 3, 4, 5, it's on every single form. But when it comes to dwelling, you have to endorse personal liability Section 2. You have to always endorse theft on every single form. Now, the good news is your personal liability Section 2 is the same exact limits. Okay, you're going to still have 100,000 per occurrence and 1,000 per person for medical payments. So it's just like you learned in your homeowner world. So that, friends, is your dwelling in a nutshell there. So again, repetition is so important. To repeat these things over and over and over again is really the only way that you're going to remember these forms, because you weren't born with knowing this information. So I always tell people, you got to repeat it. You got to say it to yourself over and over again. So I'll go back up here to our last screen on the PowerPoint. So again, thank you so much for tuning in with this dwelling form. I'm going to go over some other forms like personal auto, flood, mobile home. We're going to do some commercial as well. We're going to do these in bit pieces so that you can take breaks and take notes, and you're not so overwhelmed with your information. Again, preparing, repetition, repeating this over and over again will give you your confidence. We generate fears while we sit, we overcome them by action. This is probably one of my favorite quotes, because a lot of times we can get so overwhelmed with what we're doing that we just are paralyzed with fear. So how do we overcome that when we're trying to learn this information? Is we just got to dig in and start memorizing this information. So that concludes the dwelling, and I'll catch you in the next video.